Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to be taking a break from talking about builds, and we're going to be talking about the rework to corruption that happened for patch 1.0. I've been playing around with the system long enough to actually give my opinions on said system. So if you don't know, the old corruption system, you would have a much lower base amount of more health and damage that is provided by corruption, but the modifiers would not only scale on corruption, but they would also be significantly higher. So before, if you're at 300 corruption, right, you'd have 150% more health and damage as the base modifier, then maybe enemies deal 70% increased health and damage. Now you have 280% more health and damage, and then enemies have 20% increased health and damage. And the difference that this has caused is it's made the average difficulty of a mono much more streamlined. So the variability of difficulty, which was much worse back in the day. So for instance, you'd go from one mono having an easy time, and then the next mono would be just hell on earth with just one modifier change. And that is because the modifiers back in the day, like we said, scales on corruption, so a lot of them were just really difficult in general. So you'd go from 150% more health and damage, but you'd have 5 modifiers of 70% increased health and damage, which would be the equivalent of maybe a 1200 corruption mono or something like that at base difficulty. Although don't get annoyed by the numbers. I don't know the exact numbers anymore, but essentially it would be ridiculous. It would be an absolute disgusting change in difficulty, and they have fixed it. Now, your base corruption value is much higher, but the modifiers that you put on the mono are much lower. This has changed a lot of ways that we have played last Epoch. So the first thing that has changed is bosses actually have HP now. So for instance, back in the day, we used to play in a way that would remove modifiers from the monolith bosses and Oribus's, and we would only ever have to deal with them with the base amount of more health and damage. For videos, I would always add modifiers to my bosses because no one wants to see a modifierless boss, but now I don't have to do that anymore because the boss itself has the modifiers now at a base instead of it, being able to be stripped down to a measly 150% more health and damage or whatever corruption you're at the time. Now bosses actually have HP now. So this has raised the average amount of damage that you need to kill said bosses in a decent amount of time. Back in the day, before this patch, I would say 200k DPS was the absolute floor minimum of damage that you needed per second to deal with the endgame bosses. Now, I think that you need double that. I think you need 400k DPS to meet the new requirement, in my opinion, to make a build good. And to make it feel good. You need literally double that now. And that is because at 700 corruption, instead of enemies having 300% more health and damage or whatever it was back then, now enemies have 700% more health and damage. Now you can't strip the bosses of their extra modifiers, and they just have way more HP now. They have double, triple the amount of HP that they used to have, which means you need more damage to deal with them in a decent manner. They also do significantly more damage, so you also need to be tankier. You can't just run in with a paper thin character and delete a 300 corruption boss. You need to actually, invest into your defenses. So the average amount of defenses that you have has raised significantly that you need to deal with these bosses. So overall, I like the change. It has made it so that build creation in general is streamlined a lot more. It's a lot easier to feel the difficulty rising. It's not just a tumultuous sea where a mono at 300 corruption was more dangerous than a mono at 1000 corruption that I was doing. Now it's way more streamlined. Okay, that's great. That's a really good change. I really like it. I like the fact that bosses have actual HP now. It makes it so you're actually incentivized to build DPS, unlike before where you could just Z DPS it and just be really, really tanky, right? Cool. Great, right? The second change that they made to corruption is they made it so that LP rates are affected by corruption. So before, if I was in a level 100 zone in 100 corruption and I was farming Titan Hearts, the average LP I would get on said Titan Heart was around the same amount if I was in, like, let's say 700 corruption. Now, of course, in 700 corruption, I could have farmed more of those echoes to get more chests, like more body armors and stuff like that, right? But the average amount of me, the chances of me getting LP were not higher. So technically, there was this kind of equilibrium where difficulty of enemies versus chances of spawning those body armor nodes, right? There was like kind of like a balance between them. But now, if you don't know, LP actually raises the chances of it based on your corruption. So if you're at 700 corruption, you have a much higher chance of seeing that 2 LP Titan Heart than now. I don't know the exact details on it. I can't remember the numbers, but I know it feels significantly better. Like if you've actually played this patch and you've played in 100 corruption versus 700, you know that there's a quantifiable difference between the LP rates. Like you see things with like 3 LP way more often than before, which is great. Now, this has introduced a few problems with the system, which I need to explain some other systems to understand what the main problem is, okay? That I'm going to be talking about here, because this whole rework's been great except for one specific thing. Now, with the introduction of 1.0, we got the factions. These factions, you gain favor to progress in said faction. Essentially, COF, the more things you kill, the more XP you get, the more favor you get, the more items you can turn it into, which then gets you better gear, right? On average, you get more gear, hopefully, right? So you want to be printing as much as possible. So you want to be getting as much favor per hour as possible. This is the main way of gearing up in COF. There are other ways of getting gear, but mainly for COF gamers, you just want to be killing as many monsters as possible per hour. And then for Merchants Guild, the favor that you get is like, favor is important for Merchant's Guild, don't get me wrong, but you need significantly less favor in Merchant's Guild to compete than in COF. And of course, corruption scales the amount of favor that you get per kill. So for instance, if you don't know, that little XP experience gained, that actually modifies the amount of favor that you get. So a monster you kill at 100 corruption gives you significantly less favor than a monster you kill at 700 corruption. And this has had a lot of ripple effects in the economy and everything. So now you're incentivized to push as high of corruption as humanly possible. Now for Merchants Guild, you don't need to go that high. You just need to go high enough so that you can buy and sell comfortably, which I've noted is around 500 to 700 corruption is like when you can sell 3 LP items at a decent rate and make money that way. And that's where I've been pushing most of my builds, not because I don't want to push farther, but because I'm a very busy man and I have a lot of builds to try. So if I was trying to level and push builds all the way to 1,000 corruption every single time, I would like go crazy because I literally don't have enough time for that, sadly. So I usually stay around 700. But in COF, it's a little different because like, you know, like obviously I can get one really good drop in my favor can give me significantly more gold than if I were to drop a different item. So if I drop a really pog item and sell it for like 50 million gold, like a red ring, right? And it only costs me like 500 favor to put it on the market, turns out that's very good, right? That is very good. But COF, the way that you get stuff from your favor scales more linearly, right? Because you need to get those prophecies, and to get those prophecies, you need a lot of favor, right? So you need way more favor in COF, okay? And of course, as you push corruption, you get more favor. So there's been a lot of people that have been incentivized to push as high corruption as possible. Like there's people in 2,000 corruption, people in 4,000 corruption, people in 8,000 corruptions. The devs have stated that corruption levels above 4 digits were not really planned. Like they didn't expect people and didn't want people to be up that high. That's like way higher than they've balanced around in terms of the favor rates per mono and stuff like that. So people have been pushing that far and they're incentivized to do so because of the system. And this has caused a problem where COF sucks at lower corruption, like at the normal average, like 500, 700 corruption that most characters get to, but it's pretty good. It's good enough at like 4,000 corruption, right? Or 8,000 or whatever. And that's because you get way more favor per hour. And since you get way more favor per hour, that's more raw items per hour from COF. While with Merchant's Guild, you wouldn't get more raw items per hour. You get more favor to list more items. But if you didn't have items to list, it didn't matter. And yada, yada, yada. TLDR, pushing really high in corruption is incentivized by COF. And of course, this means that, you need to build really good builds. You need to build builds that essentially break the game in multiple different ways. Like, for instance, Snap Freeze, immobilizing Oribus for 5 years, right? You can stun lock and permalock, Oribus and bosses like that. You have stuff like Ghost Flame giving you insane amounts of DR, making it so you don't take any damage from anything, right? You have like so many different ways of cheesing corruption that these are the incentivized builds that you're supposed to play. And if you're playing like an average build, let's say like a random, like, I don't know, skeleton mage, like skeleton, like necromancer, right? You are at a significant disadvantage than someone who's playing like a real build, like a build that is like breaking the game at its core in terms of either bugs like Jelkor's Marksman, where like you have infinite amounts of negative resistance, or just overtuned builds like Falconer, right? Where it just does a lot of damage. And the COF, the difference between one COF character and the other can be drastically different. Like, I'm talking like multiple like magnitudes different. And I think that's going to be a problem, not right now, but in the future as well. Like, as long as corruption is able to be scaled in the way it is, right? Where it scales so hard, so high, so quickly, it means that you will always be incentivized to push as high corruption as possible in the future and everything. So this means that there's always going to be this kind of like war between the players and the developers, where the players are going to find the bugged, overtuned things because, EHG has been very poor in terms of actually balancing the things they put in the game. So that will always probably be the case, where people push bugged and broken things up to very high. And of course, like I said, anyone who's actually playing a normal build will be at a severe disadvantage. And what I mean is, like, builds that are actually good, they're just like average. Like, for instance, like all the coal locks you've seen, like the Stygian Coal Lock and Stygian Coal Lich, they would push like 1,000 corruption, but that's like pitiful in comparison to like 4,000. And I think that the infinite corruption thing, it's cool and all. I like it. It's cool, but I think that they need to cap it. Now, whether that be cap the rewards, make it so that rewards don't scale, experience gains don't scale after 1,000 corruption, where if you keep pushing past 1,000, you don't get more favor per mob, but the things scale higher. So if you want to go higher, you can for achievement state, because I don't want to remove the achievement of someone pushing to like 8,000 corruption or something like that. But the rewards definitely need to go, right? In general, like the rewards need to go. And or they could just hard cap it at 1,000. Then the meta would stabilize. You at a certain point, your build's like progression, you would be incentivized to build more clear, more movement speed at like 1,000 corruption, right? Instead of just pushing it to the absolute extreme. And then builds would normalize. And if your build can do like 1,000 corruption pretty fast, it won't be, it won't be essentially penalized, unlike, like it is now. So I think that they just need to just suck it up and just cap corruption, I think. Because it's not a problem now, technically, because like they could go and they could nerf builds and make it so that it's harder for people to get to 1,000 plus corruption. But power creep is something that's inherent in all video games, and it will keep happening and keep happening. And characters that we have now will be significantly like less powerful than characters we'll have in the future. So I think the nuclear option, the option that they should probably take to fix this, is to just simply cap corruption. Because overall, the corruption rework was a great change for the most part, but it is getting a little ridiculous in terms of how far you can push in corruption. Because not only is it bad in terms of the variability between like someone with a decent build and someone with a broken bug build, right? It's also a time problem. Like it takes a lot of time to push that high in corruption. Like it's not like as if like this takes like maybe a few days. This takes weeks on end. And it gets like mind numbing. Like, who wants to actually play the game for that long? I know a lot of people don't want to. And to compete, you would need to play that long, right? And obviously, I keep saying compete like as if this is a PvP game. I am very well aware that this is technically a single player ARPG, yada yada yada. But with the way that the games industry is in general, people will still compare themselves to others, and this will become a problem in the future that a lot of people share, and EHG will eventually be forced to change it. So we might as well change it now, in my opinion. We might as well change it now, at least in my opinion. Now, with all that being said, this has been Dread. They should probably cap corruption. But overall, the corruption rework was amazing. It's significantly better before. They just need to cap the rewards. Bye.